Dealing with an ex is never easy, but if they're avoidant, things become even more complicated and frustrating. The truth is that your ex's behavior isn't your fault, but it is important that you try to understand it if you're hoping to reconcile. And the most important thing to know is which type of avoidant ex you have. Is your ex a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant? Because those two groups are going to act quite differently, and so often you do need to handle them quite differently. So today we're going to dive into the psychology of these two different types of avoidant exes. And then I'll give you some real world tips that you can use to win them back depending on which type you're dealing with. So let us begin. So what are the fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant attachment styles? Obviously, these are both types of avoidant attachment. They describe people who push others away when things get emotionally intense. But their reasons for doing so and the way that they behave are actually going to be quite different. So let's start with the fearful avoidant, which is also sometimes called the anxious avoidant. Now, fearful avoidants have a deep fear of abandonment, but they also struggle with feeling overwhelmed by closeness. So they crave connection, but they also fear it. And this often creates a push-pull dynamic where they might come on strong and then withdraw when things get too real. And they're typically very emotionally conflicted about relationships and especially about breakups. So when your ex is a fearful avoidant, they're going to go back and forth a lot. In one moment, they seem to want to work things out, and the next, they pull away. So they'll be friendly, loving, caring, and then totally distant out of nowhere. They'll send mixed signals like this because they want that closeness, but when they get it, it scares them and they pull away. They're also likely to get upset with you. So you might do something innocuous and they'll be angry or cold towards you. But because they have trouble accessing their emotions and they shy away from conflict, they're going to fail to bring this stuff up with you. They fear the conversation more than they want to reconcile. So you end up in a situation where you have no idea you did anything wrong, but now they're not talking to you. And that's how powerful this attachment style stuff is sometimes. Most of the time, it's just something that's happening in the background. But when it comes to the surface, it can really wreck your relationships because it prevents communication. Now, I won't dive too deep into this, but I do want to touch on why people become fearful avoidants, because it can help you identify if your ex does fall into this category. So all of this really goes back to childhood. As a kid, your ex may have felt that they needed to serve somebody else emotionally. Typically, they're caregivers. So maybe they had narcissistic parents who relied on them for validation, or maybe they were the oldest child and were forced to parent their younger siblings. Essentially, they felt that ability to connect with someone else, but only one way, and only when they were useful to the other person. So their needs were neglected. They felt like no one was looking out for them. And another source of fearful avoidance is trauma. So maybe your ex suffered abuse, or maybe their parents were very inconsistent. They'd be present, loving, nurturing, and then they'd pull away without warning. They learned how to treat others based on how they were treated as kids. Plus, now your ex associates closeness with risk because they never knew when it would come with rejection and with coldness. And that's in contrast with the other type of avoidant you might be dealing with, which is the dismissive avoidant. Now, people become dismissive avoidant because they were taught that emotions were unimportant or negative. So maybe they'd get excited about a toy, bring it to their parents, and their parents would make them feel stupid. Or maybe they'd cry too much and their parents would yell at them, or they'd shun them when they wanted comfort. Another source for a dismissive avoidance is highly enforced independence. So latchkey kids may form this attachment style because they felt like they had to do everything on their own just to get by. They learned that they can survive and meet their own emotional needs for the most part. So now when people around them seek emotional validation, it seems like weakness to them. And so they dismiss it. And this is a cycle. You know, a dismissive parent, if they haven't dealt with their issues, is likely to raise a dismissive child. But what do we mean when we say they're dismissive? Well, basically it means that they're going to downplay emotions, both their own and those of other people. And it may seem like it's because they just don't care or they can't actually empathize with you, which can be true to a certain extent, but it's more about their own discomfort with feelings. Let's say you come to them with a problem. So for example, they keep staying out late and not letting you know when they'll be home. And this makes you feel like they don't care. So a securely attached person would say, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. I'll make sure to let you know when I'm going to be out late, and I'll make an effort to spend more time with you. But a dismissive avoidant is going to do all they can to deflect this conversation. So they'll say, It wasn't even that late. You're overreacting. Or maybe they'll say, you stay out late sometimes too, and I never get upset about it. They might even try to make a joke or change the subject or just straight up pick a fight. Basically, they'll do what they need to avoid having a real conversation because that involves vulnerability. And that's what they're afraid of. They don't want to admit fault or weakness because that would cause them to feel shame, and they really just can't handle that. And this is why they can come off as cold and distant, whereas fearful avoidance can actually be quite warm and inviting early on, only to shut down later. Whereas dismissives are likely to be cold right off the bat and take a long time to warm up to you if they ever do. Right, so how do these two types of avoidance differ when it comes to getting back together? Well, I won't lie to you. Both can be quite difficult to deal with in different ways, but both will show a fear of vulnerability. For the fearful, it will come out as an internal tug of war where they feel emotionally conflicted. So they'll be hot and cold. They'll hold you close and then they'll push you away. And the worst part is that they typically know how toxic this is to you, but instead of this knowledge changing their behavior, it's going to actually make it worse. You'll get texts, calls, or even attempts to see you, and then nothing. Strong signals and then radio silence. And this is because they now have one more reason to want to stay away from you. They'll want to avoid hurting you. So they'll say, that's it. I'm cutting it off because I'm just going to hurt this person more. But because they struggle to deal with their emotions, they're going to keep coming back for more whenever their feelings of missing you bubble up. For dismissive avoidance, this fear of vulnerability will express itself more in the inability to talk about important issues or to connect with you. So you may reach out to them to talk about the breakup or express feelings of sadness or how much you miss them, and they'll just shut down, put it off, make a joke, or otherwise, divert the conversation so they can avoid being vulnerable. So where the fearful will reach out and pull away, dismissives are more likely to cut ties completely after the breakup. They'll put on an act of being cold or indifferent, making it hard to figure out where you stand. Dismissives will seem like they've moved on almost immediately. They'll avoid discussing the past or their feelings. And if they do express vulnerability, which will be rare, but breakups can bring this up, it's going to be clearly uncomfortable for them. Okay, now let's get into the good stuff. How do you win them back? Well, if you're hoping to get a fearful avoidant ex back, here's what you need to do. First, you need to give them space, but never ghost them completely. Fearful avoidants often need a lot of space to process their feelings. If you bombard them with messages, calls, or pressure them to talk, they'll shut down. So give them space, but balance this with their fear of being abandoned. You can't totally disappear, or this will trigger their feelings of rejection that will cause them to lash out or avoid you further. So if they're blowing up your phone, you should probably respond. Just don't take it as an opportunity to get sucked back into their hot and cold behavior. Don't let them get away with the push-pull dynamic that they're famous for. If they pull away, don't chase them. And when they come back, don't treat them like things are exactly the way they were before the breakup and the two of you are in love and everything is perfect. Maintain your boundaries without disappearing. Basically, they need to know that they can rely on you, but only if they're willing to be present as well. So, generally don't play games with them or treat them exactly the way that they treat you. Be consistent with your actions, but allow them to take the lead when they actually feel ready. They might test your emotional availability or express doubts in your feelings or their own. And this is normal, and you can't take it personally. Remember, it's not that they don't care, but that caring has historically been very painful for them. They're fighting an uphill battle. So be prepared to be patient as they work through their own internal struggles. Validate their feelings, but don't rush them into reconciliation. Now, if this sounds like a hard needle to thread, that's because it is, but it is doable if you can maintain your composure and think of the long-term plan. Now, if you're dealing with the dismissive-avoidant ex, then the strategy is going to be a little bit different. They're not as emotionally expressive and they're prone to running away or shutting down. So the way that you approach them is key. Now, I will say that I know dealing with a dismissive-avoidant is going to be really, really frustrating, and it can feel quite defeating when they treat you almost like a stranger. So maintaining your own sense of well-being is really important here. You can't forget that this isn't personal. It's just how they've learned to protect themselves. But the good news is that you can use distance a lot more than you would with a fearful avoidant ex, because they'll need a lot more space and they won't crave reassurance in the same way. This is a bit of, give them a taste of their own medicine approach. So they're going to feel hurt by this, but they'll know that they have no one to blame but themselves. They'll internalize the fact that they are choosing not to have you in their life, and they can change that if they're willing to treat you right. You're also giving them time to process the breakup and come to their own conclusions. So in essence, you're showing them that you respect their independence, which is huge for dismissive avoidance. Dismissive avoidants feel swallowed up by relationships because they are so lost in a world of emotions and vulnerability. They need to feel like they can still be themselves and take that space that they need. So when you approach them again, make sure you don't come across as needy or clingy. That's what they're trying so hard to avoid. Instead, show them that reconnecting really isn't a threat to their freedom. When you reach out, be casual and friendly. Now, keep things light and low pressure. If they feel like you're trying to fix things right away, then they're going to feel pressured and they're probably going to shut down. So avoid high pressure conversations about feelings. Instead, offer understanding and let them take the lead on discussing both the past and the future. Now, if you're struggling with understanding your ex's feelings, I promise you're not alone. And that's why I created my free quiz at breakupbrad.com/quiz. I took all of my knowledge and experience about breakups and attachment theory and put together a simple tool that can uncover your ex's feelings in under 5 minutes. Again, just go to breakupbrad.com/quiz and find out how your ex really feels. So to sum it up, guys, the key difference between a fearful avoidant and a dismissive avoidant ex is in how they process emotions and intimacy. Fearful avoidants crave connection, but they fear it at the same time, while dismissive avoidants are more focused on independence and see vulnerability as a weakness. And when it comes to winning them back, your approach will depend on understanding their attachment style. Fearfuls need a balance of space and emotional support, while dismissives need low-pressure interactions and respect for their autonomy. Now, if you're going through a breakup with somebody who has an avoidant attachment style, remember, patience and understanding are your best tools. It won't happen overnight, but with the right approach, you can create the conditions for healing and you can rekindle the relationship. All right, I hope this video gave you some clarity on dealing with your avoidant ex. If you're still unsure or you want more personalized advice, feel free to drop a comment below and I will do my best to help. Or if you want to talk to me directly, go to breakupbrad.com/coaching. But before you go, don't forget to hit like if you found this helpful and subscribe for more content on breakups and attachment styles. Until next time, take care of yourself and I wish you the very best of luck.